The town of Dry Creek was alive with noise that morning. Boots clattering on wooden porches, horses snorting dust into the wind, and the sharp cry of an auctioneer echoing across the square. People had come from all around, ranchers, traders, bounty hunters and drifters. They came for livestock, tools, rifles, and whatever the lawmen dragged in from the frontier. But today, among the wagons and rusty cages, there was something different, something cruel, a human sail. Tied to a splintered post stood a girl, thin, bruised and silent. Her wrists were bound with rope so tight her skin had turned raw beneath it. She was Apache, maybe 18, maybe 20. No one cared enough to ask. Her dark hair hung tangled across her face, hiding the marks left by a whip. The crowd stared like they were looking at an animal. "Wild thing," someone spat. "Not worth feeding," another muttered. The auctioneer smirked, slapping his hat against his leg. "Ain't much left of her, but she's strong enough to work if you can tame her." "Starting bid, $5. No one raised a hand. 4, 3, 2. The sun was burning hot, the air dry and still. Flies gathered around her wounds, but she didn't move. Her lips were cracked, her eyes empty. She had already learned not to fight. From the back of the crowd, a deep voice spoke. $2. Heads turned. The voice belonged to a man standing near the watering trough, tall, lean, with dust on his coat and sadness in his eyes. His name was Eli Turner, a rancher who lived miles away from town. People said he kept to himself, ever since the fever took his wife and child. The auctioneer raised an eyebrow. "You serious, Cowboy?" "She's barely breathing." Eli nodded once. $2. The man laughed and slammed his hammer down. "Sold to the fool with no sense and too much pity." The crowd jeered. Someone shouted, "Hope she don't bite you, Turner." Eli ignored them. He stepped forward, handed the coins over and untied the rope himself. When his hand brushed her arm, she flinched violently, expecting another strike. He stopped, slow and gentle. "Easy, girl. I ain't gonna hurt you." She didn't understand his words, but his tone, soft, careful, made her look up. For a moment their eyes met, and in that moment, something fragile passed between them. Not understanding, not forgiveness, but something close to it. Eli took off his worn coat and draped it over her shoulders. The girl stared at it, confused. No one had ever covered her before, only stripped her bare. "Come on," he murmured. "Let's get you out of here." They walked past the laughing crowd, past the saloon where whiskey spilled and men bragged, past the church that had long stopped ringing its bell. The wind kicked up dust behind them like the trail of 2 ghosts leaving a graveyard. Eli helped her onto his horse. She trembled, every movement slow, afraid of the saddle, of him, of everything. He mounted behind her, careful not to touch her too close. "Hold on," he said quietly. She didn't, but he held her steady anyway. They rode for hours through the open plains. The land stretched endless and gold, broken only by dry sage and the cry of hawks overhead. She kept her head low, eyes fixed on the horizon, as if the world beyond it might be kinder. When they reached his ranch, a small, lonely cabin beside a dying stream, the sun was already setting. Eli dismounted, helped her down, and led her toward the porch. She stumbled once, catching herself on the rail. Inside, the house was quiet. A single bed, a table, a fireplace with cold ashes. It wasn't much, but it was clean, and it was safe. He poured water into a tin cup and offered it. She hesitated. He took a sip himself, then handed it back. She drank slowly, desperately, water running down her chin. "Hungry?" he asked. No answer. He placed a plate of bread and beans before her anyway. She ate with shaking hands, not taking her eyes off him. After she finished, she sat on the floor, refusing the chair. That was how slaves sat, low, unseen. Eli didn't force her. He just stoked the fire and spoke softly. "You can rest here tonight. Ain't no one coming to hurt you." She didn't understand the words, but she understood the tone. The way he didn't shout, didn't strike, didn't demand. As night deepened, she curled up beside the wall, wrapped in his coat. Eli watched from across the room, his jaw tight. He saw the scars on her back, the bruises on her legs, marks of men who had treated her like an object, not a person. He leaned back in his chair, eyes on the fire. "Lord," he whispered, "I don't know what I'm doing, but I couldn't leave her there." Outside, coyotes howled across the desert. Inside, silence, only the crackle of the fire and the faint sound of her breathing. When dawn came, Eli stepped outside to feed the horses. The girl followed quietly, still barefoot. He turned, surprised. "You can stay inside, you know." She pointed at the bucket, offering to help. He nodded slowly, handing it to her. As she poured water into the trough, the horse nudged her hand gently. She froze, then smiled, a small, uncertain thing like sunlight after rain. Eli saw it and felt something stir in his chest, something he hadn't felt since before the graves behind his house. Maybe he hadn't just bought her. Maybe fate had sent them both what they needed most, a reason to care again. That night, as they sat by the fire, she whispered a word, her name. "Naida." He looked up, startled. "Naida," he repeated softly. "That your name?" She nodded once, eyes shining in the firelight. He smiled, the first real smile in years. "All right then, Naida, you're safe here." Outside, the desert wind carried away the last echoes of laughter from that cruel auction block. And for the first time in her broken life, Naida slept without fear, under the roof of a man who saw her not as a slave, but as family. The winter wind swept across the plains like a ghost, carrying the cry of distant coyotes. Weeks had passed since Eli Turner brought the broken Apache girl home. He had given her a name, Naida, meaning water, because like water she had begun to flow again, quietly, steadily, bringing life where there had been none. At first, she spoke little. She moved softly, almost invisible, mending clothes, washing dishes, feeding the horses when he wasn't looking. But Eli saw her. He noticed the way her hands trembled when thunder rolled, the way she froze when someone shouted in town. Every scar told a story he didn't ask to hear. But he learned to understand through silence. He didn't force her to speak, to smile or to stay. He just let her be. And somehow, that freedom healed her faster than any words. A new kind of life, one morning. Eli woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of quiet humming. Naida was at the stove, barefoot, hair braided, a small smile hidden behind her concentration. He leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "You're getting good at that," he said. She turned, startled, then blushed when she realized he was smiling. "I learn," she said softly, her English broken but warm. "You teach?" he chuckled. "Guess we're both teaching each other." Life settled into rhythm. Days filled with ranch work, quiet meals, and soft laughter that grew like spring grass after rain. Naida loved the horses most, especially a brown mare named Daisy. She brushed her daily, whispered in Apache to calm her nerves, and even rode her across the plains under Eli's watchful eye. One afternoon, as they rode together across the Golden Valley, Eli said, "You ever miss your people?" Naida nodded slowly. "They gone, all gone. I am last." Eli's heart ached. "Then maybe you ain't alone anymore." She looked at him, really looked, and for the first time her eyes didn't hold fear. They held hope. The threat returns. Peace never lasted long on the frontier. One cold evening, as the sky bled red behind the mountains, a group of riders appeared, 3 men Eli recognized from town. Drunk, armed, and mean. He stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand. "Well, well," the leader sneered. "Turner, heard you bought yourself an Indian girl. Thought we'd come see if she's worth more than $2. Naida, standing inside, froze at the sound of their laughter. Memories flashed. Ropes, fire, chains, screams. Eli's voice was steady.
"She's under my roof."
"That means she's under my protection." The man spat tobacco on the dirt. "Protection from you? You ain't got the guts." Before Eli could reply, one of them drew his gun. But Nida was faster. She grabbed Eli's spare rifle from the wall, stepped onto the porch, and aimed with fierce, trembling hands. "Leave," she said, her accent thick but her voice deadly calm. The men hesitated. The fire in her eyes wasn't the look of a beaten slave. It was the spirit of the warrior she once was. Eli stood beside her, his hand steady on her shoulder. "You heard the lady," he said quietly. The leader laughed, but it sounded weak. "Fine, keep your savage. Ain't worth dying over." They turned and rode off, dust swirling behind them. When the silence returned, Nida lowered the rifle, her breath shaking. Eli took it gently from her hands. "You did good," he said. Tears welled in her eyes. "I was scared," he smiled softly. "So was I, but we made it." That night they sat by the fire, closer than ever before. Healing hearts. Days passed, and the fear faded. Nida began to hum again, this time without trembling. She helped Eli plant spring crops, rode into town by his side, and even began to laugh, light, real laughter that made him forget the emptiness of his past. One evening, Eli found her outside by the fence, watching the stars. He walked up beside her quietly. "You always look at the sky like it's talking to you," he said. She nodded. "My people say stars are spirits. They watch, then they're probably smiling right now," he said softly. "You're doing them proud." Nida turned to him, her eyes reflecting the starlight. "Why you help me, Eli? You not know me. You could walk away." He looked down at his hands, rough, scarred, lonely. "Maybe 'cause I know what it's like to lose everything. My wife, my son, both gone to the fever. I thought I'd die alone out here." He met her gaze again. "Then I saw you, and I realized maybe God wasn't done with me yet." Tears slipped down her cheeks, and for the first time she reached for his hand. "You're not alone now." A family-found spring came with wildflowers and gentle rains. The ranch bloomed again. So did their hearts. Nida had started to sing while working, her voice carrying across the fields. The horses seemed calmer when she was near, the house warmer when she was home. One Sunday morning, Eli rode into town for supplies. The townsfolk stared as Nida followed him, wearing a clean blue dress, her hair neatly braided. Whispers filled the air. "That's the Apache slave Turner bought." But Eli didn't flinch. He took her hand and led her through the street like a lady, not property. At the general store, the old shopkeeper smiled kindly. "Looks like you found yourself a helper, Turner." Eli glanced at Nida, who smiled shyly. "Not a helper," he said. "Family." The old man nodded with respect. "Ain't many men round here with that kind of heart." The ending, months passed, and the two built a life that no one expected. A life of quiet peace, hard work and shared laughter. Eli fixed the roof. Nida painted the walls. Together, they planted new seeds both in the earth and in their hearts. One summer evening, they sat on the porch watching the sunset, the same kind of sunset that once saw her sold for $2. Nida rested her head on his shoulder. "I was slave once," she whispered. "Now I'm free." Eli wrapped his arm around her. "You were always free, Nida. Just took someone to remind you." She smiled softly. "And you, Eli, you were alone. Now you have me." He kissed the top of her head. "Yeah, I reckon I do." As the sun dipped behind the mountains, two souls, once broken, once lost, found home not in the house behind them, but in each other. In that quiet corner of the Wild West, where life was cheap and mercy rare, a lonely cowboy and a wounded Apache girl proved one truth stronger than any bullet.